Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside with my co-host Dean, and for today's show, we're going to be talking about the Bell Witch legend, which is apparently one of the most famous paranormal stories in America.
I actually never heard of the Bell Witch before we talked to another guest we had on earlier. And I'm actually interested in this topic after poking around in it for a while because there are some historical aspects to it that seem surprising. Like, wasn't there a president who came down to
President Andrew Jackson. Yeah, I think he
yeah,
heard that his entourage was like traveling through. This takes place in Tennessee, by the way. So he was like traveling through Adams, Tennessee for some particular reason. I can't remember.
hmm,
And he heard the story and he wanted to experience it himself. So him and his entourage posted it up there in the night. They kind of experienced it. But don't want to jump too far ahead into the story.
yeah,
But I'm surprised you never heard of this prior to our talk with our guest. I think it was Lisa, right?
yeah.
Was it Lisa? Yeah. Where she talked about the nice ghosts that lived in her home. So, pretty cool episode. But yeah, dude, with this Bell Witch legend, I've actually heard of it before and I was always curious about it. And I've heard it on a couple of other podcasts and it's really interesting to me. Just
Yeah.
the way that things play out with this whole Bell Witch situation.
After doing this podcast for a while, we've kind of stumbled across topics that touch on the South and like Appalachia and stuff like that, or Appalachia. I think that stories coming from the South and parts like that are they're kind of becoming more creepy to me because before I didn't really hold them in like a high regard of creepiness, but the more you dive into these stories, there's just something unsettling. I think about like in the South where it's like you go to places where the air is very still at night in the summer and it's just like sweltering, like humid, and then you just hear the crickets go quiet. Like I that's kind of the image I get now when I think of like creepy things in the South. I used to not get think about that. This is just an example of how things can turn wrong in places that you wouldn't expect. For people who might not be familiar with the Bell Witch like I was, why don't we start off by just giving some background about the time frame, and we already gave the location, but like let's set the stage. Let's set the theme.
All right. So you're looking at this taking place in the early 19th century. And the key players here are the Bell family. The Bell family consists of John Bell Sr., who seemed to be plagued the most by the disturbances of the Bell Witch. He seems like he was one of the primary targets. Then you had his wife, Lucy Bell, his younger daughter, Betsy Bell, who was unfortunately another primary target of the Bell Witch. And then you have John Bell Jr. and the other siblings. And what's really interesting about this entire case is that when you go through it, you see early on, like I said, John Bell Sr. is one of the primary targets. And then his daughter is another one of the primary targets. But what's interesting with his wife, Lucy Bell, apparently they reported that she was treated differently by the entity and she was treated in a more benevolent manner. The entity, which is quote unquote dubbed as Kate, is said to have shown Lucy particular favor. Apparently, the spirit brought Lucy fruits out of season, sang her hymns, and despite the terror it inflicted on others, Kate was said to have often reassured Lucy and even expressed concern for her well being. But obviously, overall, if you're sitting there and you're watching your daughter and your husband get attacked by this fucking thing. Obviously, she was still disturbed about what was going on there. What's interesting is that the other kids, I want to go over them very quickly because the focal point of the story are John Bell Sr. and his daughter Betsy. So the other siblings, Drury, Richard, and Joel, experienced the hauntings to a lesser degree compared to John Bell Sr. and Betsy. And what's interesting is that his son, John Bell Jr., ended up being a key figure because he attempted to confront the spirit, which, that's not something you're supposed to do. And apparently, John Bell Jr. was said to have several direct conversations with the entity which identified itself as Kate. And also, we mentioned earlier, there's the encounter with Andrew Jackson, which we'll save for later. To start the story off, I'd like to jump right into the John Bell Sr. experience. Did you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, sure. John Bell Sr., obviously the patriarch of the family and the central figure. I think he really was the one who launched the attention into what was going on, which is strange, right? Because you think, like we've talked about in the past, about how guys typically are the ones to kind of write stuff off like this, like, whatever. It's like I got work to do. I don't know what that was, so I'm not gonna pay attention to it. But he began noticing that he could not ignore like strange animals on his property. So like these are physical creatures he started seeing, and one of them weirdly was the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. And I am very respectful of people. Like I would never call people out on their bullshit immediately. But if he said that to me in real life, in my mind, I'd be like, oh, okay. Like I'd say to him, like, oh shit. Yeah, let's look for that thing. That's crazy. But in my mind, I'm like, did he get into some shrooms by accident? Or like, maybe he had some bad alcohol. I don't know. That would be my first thought. But as time went on, he started seeing more and more of these weird creatures. I wish we had more of a detailed list of what he saw. If body of a dog and head of a rabbit wasn't weird enough, he started experiencing strange sounds. And I think at first it was only him hearing them. He would hear knocks on walls, on the doors. He would hear like, chains being dragged or rattled on the floor, which is really like you can't mistake that, right? Like if there's a knocking sound, you think like, oh, maybe an animal running into my wall or something on the outside. But if you hear chains rattling in your home and you don't have any chains, that's an interesting twist to that auditory thing. But then it actually progressed even further for John. So it started off seeing animals in the distance. Then it started, he started hearing voices and noises. Do you have anything else to add for John?
Yeah, I do actually. You mentioned that John encountered that strange animal, right? With the body of a dog and a head and he shot it. So that seems to be the start of it. He shoots that thing like you said, but that seems to just be the start of it. So shortly after the sighting, that's when the strange issues started happening. Like you just mentioned, the chains being dragged across the floor, and the sounds of rats and all of these weird noises that seemed to follow him in particular. He heard disembodied voices that would whisper to him. Nobody else in the family could make out what was being said. Sometimes the voice would call his name. Oh boy, that's lovely.
What you've got a bell witch, man.
I know. They'd call out his name in a mocking or threatening manner, and that would heighten his sense of dread. So given that it's the 19th century, it wouldn't have been like a large home. They would have probably been in like one area, or there would have been like a small room and like a living area for the fireplace and everything of that sort. I could see how someone would feel very uncomfortable if you're sitting there with your family and then you just hear a voice call out to you and it sounds like it's threatening you, but you can hear it clearly, but no other people can hear it, but they're like, well, I can't really make out what they're saying. So I don't know, dude. That just makes me so uncomfortable. The voice thing. I wonder what voices called out to him, whether if it had like a specific voice of a person or was it just completely random. I wonder if it was like something that he recognized because that would have made it 10 times more creepy because I already told the story of how I heard the voice of my mom. So that just like, reminds me of that, of whatever the hell he was dealing with.
When I think of that, I think about whenever I woke up to my name being called before. Like I've never had the experiences you've had or other people have
Wait,
had
you
on.
had that's happened to you?
So I mentioned it, I
I
think
don't think you
on
did.
that. Well, that what was the episode where we were talking to somebody recently who also had experiences hearing voices, and you were kind of like riffing back and forth about having those experiences. I think it was
Was it Reeves?
Reeves. I think it was
Yeah.
Reeves. Yeah. And then I had brought up conversation where I had never heard my name being called in a waking state, or like I had never heard someone call me in a waking state who wasn't there. But there have been times where like I have been asleep or like drifting off to sleep, and then I hear someone calling for help, or someone calling to me to help them, and then I wake up out of that sleep. But then obviously there's no There's no one there, like the person who called me, like maybe it was my wife, she's like sleeping next to me, or my mom or something. You know, it's I never really put a lot of stock in that because I've had hallucinogenic dream experiences before where I come out of sleep and I see things that clearly aren't there, like giant spiders. Like, you know, there's no giant spider that's ever existed other than like 300 million years ago, the size of a frying pan. So, but I think that hearing that is there's a very clear distinction and difference between hearing something like that when you're fully awake versus when you're like drifting off to sleep or when you're actually asleep. So I think that based off of this story and obviously from your experiences yourself too, like both of you have heard this in your waking state. So I think that kind of adds a creepy factor to it because if you're sitting there and you're minding your own business and you're fully lucid and you suddenly hear someone calling for you and there's no one there, then that's probably a red flag. You either have a tumor or there is some kind of like creepy supernatural thing going on. But yeah, I have to wonder too what he actually heard, if it was just a little whisper like close up to his ear or if it was like a shout from the distance. Now, whenever I woke out of dream states and I've heard people calling for me, they've always been a shout from a distance. And I think that's why I wake up because you think that someone's screaming for your help very far away. But I don't know, when you heard your mom call you, was it kind of like what level of auditory experience was it? Was it loud, quiet?
Imagine like your mom is in the kitchen and she's like yelling at you to come and eat dinner. That tone of voice.
Okay. But
It
like
was
several
fairly.
rooms away?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was like she was far away. So I wonder if he encountered the same thing.
Probably
Damn.
not because you said it was a small it's like a small cabin, right? So, unless the
Yeah,
person was
but
calling for him outside, maybe.
right, maybe calling for him outside, or maybe one of those cases. You remember when you see like horror movies and you're dealing with like a ghost or a demon or something like that, and they'll like shout in the protagonist's ear
Oh,
like
yeah.
really loud, and it'd be like, "Oh shit, what the fuck was that?" Type
Yeah.
of thing. I wonder if that was potentially going on as well. Aside from the auditory stuff, the shit seemed to have gotten worse as time went on. So it went from auditory to physical attacks. So John Bell began to experience severe physical assaults by an invisible force. He was frequently slapped, pinched, and beaten by something unseen. Bell described feeling as though sharp pins were being stuck into his body, causing him intense pain, and these attacks seemed to grow more frequent and severe as the time went on. One of the most terrifying aspects for John Bell was that these attacks often occurred when he was alone, making it difficult for others to witness or intervene. However, other family members occasionally saw him being struck in the head or heard sounds of the blows. While I was reading that, I was trying not to laugh because you remember the episode of SpongeBob where he was trying to get into the salty spittoon and then Patrick like beat himself up in front of the bouncer.
Yeah, that was a crazy episode. It's pretty funny.
Or that part in Liar Liar where he's like whooping his own ass in the bathroom.
"I'm kicking my ass."
That's, do you
Yeah.
mind? Okay, I'm not trying to make fun of John Bell here, but I just couldn't help because, they do shit like that in movies. Well, what do you think is going on here, dude? Do you think this entity or whatever was actually attacking him, or do you think he was doing physical harm to himself?
I think there's a lot of room to explain away or use the idea that he was harming himself only because I just learned from this more specific research that so we'll talk more about his son later, but John Bell Jr. actually was already an adult in 1817, which is when specifically the hauntings began, it sounds like. So 1817 was actually when things started going downhill. So if John Bell Jr. was already an adult, when I hear adult in like the 1800s, I guess you could probably say even as young as 17, but he was probably like at least in his 20s. Back then, like life expectancy was much shorter, right? So if you've got a son in his 20s and you say like the dad had him when he was like 20, 25 or so, so the dad's like pushing mid 40s, maybe even 50, that's getting up there in terms of how long people lived on average back then. I think maybe I would guess the average is like 62, 63. So he was getting towards the end of his life already and probably wasn't in the best of health. They probably didn't have access to like all the fruits and vegetables and necessities that they would need to have a healthy, balanced diet down there in the boons of or like the backwoods of Tennessee. So I kind of envision, like, I imagine a father who's getting older and doesn't really have anyone to take care of him or help him out. And then maybe he starts developing some kind of dementia or some kind of really serious psychological issues from dilapidation, like neurological breakdown or something like that. Maybe it's even because he doesn't have anyone to talk to. Who knows? Like, I don't even know what people's situations were like on average back then, but it could very well be that he didn't have anyone to like converse with. And we know through studies today that what staves off death the most from people who are older, it's interaction with other people. Like if you have a purpose and you interact with other people on a regular basis, you're less likely to die or have any serious ailments. So that's just the first place my mind goes with this conversation. But I will say that there has to be some additional factor to this story because it's not just some old man claiming that he had all these beats and bruises from some kind of evil spirit. We're talking about his children or other people actually hearing and seeing these experiences that he went through with the paranormal attacking him and whatnot. So
With regards to his age, John Bell Sr. was born in 1750 and he died on December 20th, 1820 at the age of 70. So if we're looking at the sequence of events of when this started in 1817 and he dies in 1820, or let's call it 1816 to 1820, he's in his 60s. So maybe he had some sort of issue or something of that sort. And you want to hear something gross?
go.
He married his wife when he was 32 and she was 12.
Boom. There you go.
It's
I
disgu
that's those are
disgusting.
the old ways. The old ways.
Yeah, seriously, holy shit, dude. Yeah, so given that he, married a 12-year-old at the age of 32, maybe these physical attacks were warranted, but anyway, like you mentioned as well, going into further detail about his health deterioration. So now that we know the timeline of his age, he would have been in his mid 60s at the time because he died at age 70 in 1820. So apparently, he developed symptoms where his mouth would seize up, rendering him unable to eat or speak. These episodes were accompanied by his throat swelling. Despite seeking medical advice, no symptoms could be identified. The family and the local community began to believe that the Bell Witch was the direct cause of his illness. The entity itself seemed to confirm this belief, as it would often mock and torment Bell about his deteriorating condition. The spirit itself, which we mentioned, identified itself as Kate, openly declared that it intended to kill John Bell, and it claimed to have a personal vendetta against him, but never fully explained the reason behind its animosity. The entity's attacks on Bell became a daily occurrence, wearing him down physically and mentally, which one could understand in his advanced age. And then finally, on December 19th, 1820, John Bell fell into a coma and never regained consciousness. He died the next day on December 20th, 1820. And like you said, they found a strange liquid vial near his bed, and apparently they tested it on a cat, which is kind of fucked up, which died immediately after ingesting it. And like you said, the entity claimed responsibility, saying she gave him the liquid to end his life. So after John Bell died, there were reports that the Bell Witch laughed and celebrated John Bell's death, claiming that it had finally accomplished its goal. Following his death, the haunting activity decreased significantly, though it did not entirely cease. The death of John Bell Sr. is considered one of the most significant and tragic elements of the Bell Witch legend. The spirit's relentless torment and mysterious circumstances surrounding his demise have fueled speculation and fear for generations, making the story of the Bell Witch one of the most famous hauntings in America. So that is the story of John Bell. But apparently, John Bell was not the only target. His daughter Betsy was. But before we jump into Betsy Bell's incidents, did you have any final thoughts on John Bell? Because my mind is running at a million miles an hour right now because this thing, whatever it was specifically after him. And I keep trying to figure out why. Maybe he was abusive. Maybe he hurt his kids. Maybe I don't want to get too far ahead because maybe we could speculate later what the Bell Witch actually is or was. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Let's go back to this poor cat for a second.
All right, let's go. I feel look at you laughing at it though.
I'm not laughing at the dead cat. I'm laughing at the idea that people were like just standing around, like, wow, how do we figure out what this is? And they just all turn at the same time and see a cat. It's
Cat.
just like wrong place.
What
wrong
is
time.
that called? Which what is a Schrodinger's cat or whatever?
Oh,
Look,
yeah,
cat
yeah.
in the
Schrodinger's cat.
uranium. Yeah.
Yeah, in the box is a dead or like it's superposition anyway.
Mm.
I just that's just how my mind works nowadays because like I watch to kind of compensate and deal with like the gravity of the shittiness of life. I watch a lot of comedy shows and I just picture I don't know, something out of like Always Sunny or something like that, where they're just like standing around like with holding this vial or like, well, this clearly killed him. They killed the man. And then they just and they're like, well, how do we test it? You test it. No, I'm not gonna drink it, you drink it. And then like they just hear like a meow out of the corner, and then they just all turn at the same time and see a cat. And then they're just trying to coax this cat over. But yeah, just that's just my dark comedy brain flipping over. But if taking it seriously, if you give a liquid that clearly killed a man to a cat and it killed the cat as well, and now you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was some kind of like you would start suspecting people, right? Like I know that they didn't have forensics back then and they probably didn't even have like a sheriff if that was even a thing where they were
Oh, they
but
probably did, but he was
they
probably all
sure
the way into
okay.
town.
Yeah, in town, like so right. So like in this, this section, this area, it's out in the woods or whatever, or out in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. Like they didn't really have a lot of coverage for law enforcement. So I imagine it's people like the elders are just standing around trying to figure out what to do. And but then if you get to that point though, you have to start suspecting people, right? Like you can't just start throwing around this idea that somehow some evil entity manipulated time and space and brought this vial or something into physical form and then gave it to him and he drank it. Like no, like someone more likely, what's the most likely situation? Someone came in the home with this bottle or this vial and told this old man to drink it because it was medicine and he drank it and it killed him. So there's got to be some kind of ulterior motive like thing going on here. I would wonder what the actual familial background, like you said,
Right.
maybe somebody was maybe he was abusive to one of his children, or it sounds like his son John, though, John Bell Jr. was like the most lucid and like he was like the most level-headed of them all. Aside from the paranormal aspect, it sounds like a great like murder mystery too.
Right.
That's just my
Bell
FLM.
Witch Clue. That should be a version. That should be a version of the Clue game, the Bell Witch version.
He did it with poison and a cat in the cellar.
The old seller. But yeah, dude, those are some good thoughts. I'd like to speculate more towards the end of what possibly could have been going on. Poltergeist, maybe. Who knows? All right, so let's pivot to the youngest daughter of John and Lucy Bell, Betsy, who unfortunately was another primary target of the Bell Witch's wrath. Her experiences were some of the harrowing in the entire legend, as the entity seemed to focus much of its energy on tormenting her. Betsy's trouble began around the same time as her father in 1817 when the family first started noticing strange occurrences. At first, Betsy experienced the same mysterious noises that plagued the rest of the family. So I would assume that would be the knocking, the chains dragging on the floor, like we mentioned earlier. But just like with her father, these instances escalated into physical attacks. Betsy became the target of physical attacks by the entity, which were more intense and more frequent than what other family members experienced aside from her father. The reports said that she was slapped, She was struck by unseen forces. She was pinched. She had her hair pull. Sometimes the entity threw her around. And what's interesting with this is that her attacks were witnessed by other family members and visitors, and they were often left in shock and horror at what they saw. Apparently, the attacks on her were relentless and they would happen at night when she was trying to go to sleep. So basically, what the Bell Witch would do is that it would yank her out of bed, pull her by her hair so hard that clumps of hair would get torn out, and then the entity would smack her so hard that it would leave handprints all over her face and body. Here with John Bell, nobody was seeing him get attacked, but with Betsy, we're seeing like a full-fledged Patrick Star type of moment in front of the salty spittoon.
As you were talking, I was really interested in trying to figure out what, and I think you looked it up on your end already, but I wanted to see what the, Bell Witch home looked like. I mean, I'm sure it's long gone by now, but I think there are some pictures online that look like they're legitimate,
I
but there are old looking pictures where, like, it looks like somebody captured it before it underwent renovation or whatever before, or even it was torn down. But like, so I'm looking at these old pictures. It's actually a two-story home, which I wasn't expecting. The other thing too, as you were talking, and like you were kind of spinning up all these questions in my head as you were bringing this stuff up. But I had to wonder, like, when I hear stories like this, I always want to know like the background of the people in depth because you want to set the stage in your head about the story you're hearing. Because when I'm hearing the story early on, I had a complete misconception about all the people involved. I'm thinking like out in the middle of nowhere in the boons of Tennessee, and they're living this ramshackle small hut, and they are maybe doing some kind of subsistence farming, like, but they're mostly just out in the wild, just doing their thing. They seemed like they were pretty well put together, educated people because John Bell Sr., like, he was a farmer, but he actually owned like a quite a bit of land. So it says here that he had a large farm and he grew all kinds of crops, raised livestock. And let me tell you, like, I did like a touch of that when I was like, my first job was working on a farm. That shit is hard. Working on a farm is really hard. So he was probably put together really well, at least in terms of like being responsible and doing his trade and stuff like that. And then his sons also followed in his footsteps. So he must have had some kind of relationship with them where, hey sons, I need you to come help me work the farm. Yeah, dad, sure. And even if there was some kind of consternation, it's clear that they were together enough to work together or at least like learn. And maybe it's possible they even loved each other, like going even further, like father son bonding and all that stuff. So this kind of changes the narrative for me. So when you're talking about these experiences that were happening where, the sister's hair is getting pulled and the scratches and all that stuff, like, and people and family members are seeing it, I think that that gives a lot of credibility to the story because you're having a tight knit family who actually is put together pretty well. They work day in day out together. They live together at least for most of their lives, and now things are happening to them that they can't explain. And the fact that they're talking about hair getting ripped out, like straight out of the head, I'm sure people, back then were around to see the results of that. So if you want to talk about faking, I don't think that that's likely. Like they would actually had to have ripped her hair out. And I think that you'd probably have to be a maniac to do that just for some kind of attention. Doesn't seem like they have any kind of resolve or they would get anything out of this. That's just how my mind is kind of progressing in this story. It's turning very interesting.
Yeah, the key thing for me, especially with Betsy, is that the key word was visitors. So you have people that are not in the home on a daily basis seeing this invisible force absolutely kicking the shit out of this girl, which I don't know how the hell I would have endured that shit. Could you imagine that? You're just trying to go to sleep and then something yanks you out of your bed and just starts slapping the shit out of you. I mean, well, you have a kid, so you might already
And I have a wife. They both do that. Sometimes together.
I'm sure it's deserved. So we had the auditory stuff, with the sounds, the scratching, the chains. We had the physical attacks, which is, you know, terrible in itself. But now you go into psychological torment in which she's being attacked, but this thing is attacking her psychologically as well. So the entity had a particular interest in Betsy's emotional state and did whatever it could to distress her. Betsy, like her father, would hear voices mocking her, threatening her, and telling her that she would never escape the grasp of the Bell Witch. According to reports, they said that these voices were terrifying and unrelenting and often kept her awake at night. So, what's really disturbing was that Betsy never had the feeling of being safe in her own home because why would you? You're being physically harmed and you have something mocking you. So, and not even in her home, it seemed like this thing would follow her wherever she went. So, kind of making her life a living hell. As a result, Betsy's schoolwork began to diminish, her social life suffered, and she became essentially like very withdrawn and she was fearful of everything because I mean I could only imagine. And what's even worse, Betsy was engaged to be married with her childhood sweetheart Joshua Gardner, and Betsy's romantic relationship with him ended up becoming another focal point of the Bell Witch's torment. The entity, which called itself Kate, opposed the match for reasons that were never explained. Whenever Joshua Gardner was present, the entity would intensify its attacks on Betsy, slap her, pull her hair, subject her to other forms of abuse in front of Joshua. Apparently, the entity also harassed Joshua, though not severely as it did Betsy. Despite the efforts for them to stay together, the relationship took its toll, and under the immense pressure of being constantly harassed, both of them being constantly harassed, you would think Joshua would be the one to break off the engagement, but Betsy was the one that broke off the engagement, which was heartbreaking for them both, but she believed that was the only way to stop the attacks. After they broke up,
Interesting.
which is interesting, after they broke up, the intensity of her attacks and hauntings lessened a little bit, but did not cease entirely, which is insane. What do you make of Betsy's part of the story here?
Yeah, I didn't have that in my notes, so I didn't even know about the Joshua part where she was previously engaged. I just knew that she ended up marrying her former school teacher, Richard Powell, which we can talk about at some point too, but
Gross.
I was going to say that's a run for the money with a 12-year-old daughter thing, but
Yeah.
I wonder. I don't wonder because I don't care. But I was going to say, like, if it was what level of school where that he taught. Anyway, so after Betsy broke off this relationship, he said it was a lot of the interactions happened from the poltergeist or whatever this was. Like they ticked up, and obviously, I think like whoever's orchestrating the story, whether it is really a poltergeist or someone trying to orchestrate the story, your mind immediately goes to jealousy. So maybe the spirit or the entity, if it was real, saw Betsy being the youngest as one that it could resonate most closely with, and it thought that, oh well, I don't want this man coming to take away Betsy from me because I'm not going to have her to myself anymore. But then the other interesting side to that is she was already being abused before that, right? She was already before she was engaged, she was already being targeted. Um, as we said, she was targeted almost as bad as her father, John Bell Sr. So that's weird, right? Like, why would the entity wanna it's almost like, I think of like a little boy at the playground, like picking at like a girl, like pulling her hair and stuff. He actually really likes her, but he's like still pulling her hair and messing with her first. That's the only thing I could think of in this situation. It sounds like the poltergeist was like targeting John Sr. because it hated him and it wanted to kill him, but it was targeting the youngest daughter, Betsy, because I don't know, like for whatever reason, like it was just pissed off still at the family, or it just needed an outlet and it saw her as like the easiest target. Who knows? But I don't know. Do you have any other final thoughts before we flip it down the line?
Yeah, to go into Betsy's life after John Bell passed away. So, after he passed away, the presence Kate diminished and the hauntings became less frequent, and the spirit supposedly bid farewell to the family in 1821, claiming that it would return in 7 years. Some accounts suggest that, the entity did return, but Betsy was no longer the primary focus of its attention. But so Betsy breaks off this engagement, right? Then she marries Richard Powell, a former school teacher in 1824, who was much older than her. And there were rumors that he had been interested in her even during her engagement. Some later theories suggest that Powell might have had some connection to the events, though this is just speculation. The good thing is, despite the traumatic experiences that she went through in her youth, Betsy went on to live a relatively normal life after her marriage. She and Richard had several children, and she became a respected member of her community. Betsy never spoke about her experiences with the Bell Witch, which is completely understandable. And she remained somewhat recluse type of figure, potentially still being haunted by the memories that she had. I think her story is one of the more interesting parts of the story because one, you have people witnessing what she's going through, the physical torment, the psychological torment. You have the thing with the engagement, and then you have the thing with a creepy ass school teacher swooping in afterward. I don't know, dude. This is
Yeah, something's not adding up, right?
yeah, something don't smell right here. So going into John Bell Jr., who was the second eldest son of John Bell and Lucy Bell, is that correct? I think Jesse was the
Yeah.
first son. So John Bell Jr. was another character in this entire story that had experiences as well. So he wasn't frequently targeted, but he had some notable encounters with the entity. John Bell Jr. was already living as an adult nearby when the haunting began in 1817. Like the rest of the family, he was aware of strange occurrences and disturbances that plague his parents' home. But the entity did not initially target him with the same intensity as it did with his father or sister. John Jr. experienced some of the same mysterious noises that troubled the family, the knocking on the wall, the sounds of the chains, scratching noises. However, he was more skeptical of the supernatural explanation and he sought logical reasons for disturbances. Hey, it's you. Uh, he ended up confronting the entity. So, as the haunting grew more severe, John Bell Jr. became more involved in trying to understand and wanting to confront the entity. He is one of the few that communicated directly with the spirit who identified itself as Kate. So, John apparently engaged in a conversation with the spirit where he would ask it questions and challenge its presence, and during the exchanges, the entity displayed a high level of intelligence and knowledge, often surprising John with its responses. It could answer questions about distant places and events, some of which were later verified. This led John to believe that he was dealing with a powerful and knowledgeable force. In these conversations, the entity claimed that it had come to torment John Bell Sr. and to ultimately cause its death. It was clear that the spirit held a deep seated animosity towards John Sr., though it never really explained the reason behind its vendetta. John Jr. would sometimes challenge the spirit's motives, but the entity remained resolute in its intentions. John Bell Jr. was one of the witnesses of severe attacks on both his father and sister. He witnessed his father being struck by invisible forces, the physical abuse that Betsy endured, including the slaps, pinches, hair pullings. These incidents were apparently distressing for him as he was unable to protect his family. But despite the horror of all of this, he remained the more level headed members of his family and taking the role of protector and investigator. He tried to remain rational, even as the supernatural nature of the events became undeniable. Bell Jr. was present when his father fell into a coma in December of 1820, and he was involved in the discovery of the strange vial of liquid near his father's bed. After John Bell Sr.'s death, the entity openly claimed responsibility for the demise. John Jr. was the one that tested the liquid on a cat. That asshole.
Come on, John. I liked you, man.
Yeah, so he was the one that tested it on the cat, and this confirmed the entity's claim and solidified John's belief in the supernatural and the haunting.
That's a big red flag. Wouldn't it be a big red flag to like a like a forensics investigator in law enforcement? It's like, oh, the son found the vial and found his dad's dead body, and he happened to be the only one to give it to a cat, and he also talked to the spirit like later on, and no one else was around.
Right?
So at first, I was thinking, Betsy did it because someone because the dad named her Betsy Bell. I'll
Right.
get you, Dad, for naming me Betsy Bell.
Betsy Bell.
Do you know how much I got made fun of in school, Dad? So maybe I don't know. Now I'm flipping more towards maybe John Bell Jr. Or maybe it was real. I don't know. We'll find out.
Who knows? Who
Or maybe not.
knows? Who knows? Following his father's death, John Bell Jr. continued to experience the presence of the entity, though, like we said before, the haunting diminished. The spirit of Kate told John Jr. that it would leave the family but would return in 7 years. Some say that it did return in 1828, engaging in conversations with John Jr., though these interactions were less malevolent and focused more on philosophical and religious discussion.
See, that's the kind of engagement I want to have with a ghost, man. Like if I'm going to talk to an entity, I don't want it to like mess with me. Let's just talk, man. Let's rap.
Apparently, the entity talked to John about various topics, including the origins of the universe, morality, the nature of the afterlife. These conversations, while strange, were not terrifying and did not result in any harm to the family. The spirit came back and was like, you know what? You're a
He's
cool
all cool
dude.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a
I
cool
saw a lot
dude.
of shit in 7 years. I traveled to the Crab Nebula, like I opened my mind, man. I'm ready to have some conversations. I traveled to the 60s, dropped some acid. I'm back. Not the 1860s, the 1960s.
1960.
And I also just imagine like John Bell Jr. just sitting in a chair with a bottle of liquor and just like talking to himself because like he's getting to an age where he's getting really philosophical about like we are. We're getting older, right? And we're like the gravity of realization of like what it means to be alive and all the shit that we like talk about on this podcast. We're just like basically we're just John Bell Jr. just talking to ourselves, claiming it to be a poltergeist that we're talking to. In reality, we're just talking to our dumbasses like in circles.
Apparently, he too became a respected member of society. He provided a testimony about the events that took place, contributing to the preservation of the Bell Witch legend. His accounts are considered the most reliable, and given his direct involvement in his efforts to understand and confront the enemy, his role is often seen as a rational and determined figure trying to protect his family. And before we close out today and give our final thoughts, we got to go to the Andrew Jackson story, man.
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing though about what we were just talking about? So I think the craziest thing about this story so far to me is that the people involved, like, okay, so imagine today, right? If someone in this day and age came out and said, yeah, we're having this problem with this poltergeist, and put aside the idea that we can capture film and audio and like do testing, like people do all the psych or the paranormal testing that we can do. Put that aside for now and just imagine someone coming out and claiming they have these experiences with some poltergeist or entity that's like messing with their family. I feel like people who would do that nowadays would like get shot in the foot. Like they would have their like 20 minutes in the spotlight and then they would be done, right? And then nothing would come of it. But this family, like they went through well, they said that they went through hell with this poltergeist, right? But they actually a lot of the family ended up becoming very successful, weirdly. The Betsy girl, who was like one of the most targeted, she married that school teacher who ended up becoming a really well-respected member of society and a politician. And then John Bell Jr. ended up being very well respected in society. But it just seems odd to me that like the family could they were alive in a time and a place where they could be like, "Oh, a witch was targeting us. Ah, how crazy!" But then they also reached like the upper echelons of society. That seems very strange to me, and I just had to put that out there before we continued on to the Andrew Jackson story, because I guess that kind of factors into it as well. Because I guess you could say, like, they could use that. Well, oh, our situation was so dire that we actually had a president come down and like look at us, and maybe that was the one thing that they got lucky about. Like Andrew Jackson just happened to be coming through the area, heard this story, and then just because he came down and was present and is associated with everything that happened, that like they were able to parlay that later on into, like, "Oh, you called me crazy? Like, well, Andrew Jackson came to talk to me, so how crazy am I now?" And then they made him
You're
a politician, like,
right.
it's crazy,
And the
man.
thing is with Andrew Jackson, I was incorrect. He wasn't president at the time, but he was a major general in the Tennessee militia at the time. So
That's
that's
even
why
crazier.
why he was local. Jackson was known for his bravery and skepticism, and when he heard the rumors about the strange occurrences at the Bell family farm, he became curious and he wanted to investigate himself. So, according to the legend, Jackson had heard so many stories about the Bell Witch that he couldn't resist the temptation to see if it was true. He gathered a group of men, including friends and soldiers, and they set off for the Bell farm, intent of confronting whatever was behind the supernatural disturbances. Jackson arrives at the farm with his entourage, and something unusual happened. While traveling down the road to the Bell homestead, the group's wagon suddenly stopped. The horses pulling the wagon wouldn't move forward no matter how much they were urged or whipped. Some accounts claim that the wheels of the wagon became stuck as if held by an invisible force. So Jackson and his men were baffled by the inexplicable event. They examined the wagon and the harness and the road, and they found nothing wrong. According to one version of the story, Jackson exclaimed, "By the eternal, boys, it is the witch." At that moment, a disembodied voice, which some believe to be the Bell Witch herself, responded, saying along the lines of, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." Following this eerie proclamation, the wagon was suddenly freed, and the group was able to continue their journey to the Bell home. So eventually, Jackson and his men get to the Bell family home, and they're welcomed by the family. They settle in for the night, and the group was prepared for any disturbances. Jackson brought along someone that was a self-proclaimed witch tamer who said that he could subdue any spirit or witch they may encounter.
I love this. We've talked about this before, where it's like, what was that story where it's like where a self-proclaimed anything is a red flag?
Yeah.
Who else proclaimed it? Just me.
Just
I
me.
just decided one day.
Right? Yeah, it's just me. I could do this. So the night wore on. The witch tamer began to boast and challenge the spirit, claiming that his silver bullet would protect him and that he would rid the family of the witch's torment once and for all. However, that didn't go as planned. Suddenly, the man began to scream and thrash about as if he was being attacked by an invisible force. He was struck, slapped, thrown about the room by the unseen entity. The other men tried to help him, but were unable to stop the assault. The witch tamer fled the house in horror, admitting defeat and claiming that he had been bested by the Bell Witch. Jackson and his men were reportedly unnerved by what they witnessed. According to the legend, Jackson left the Bell farm the next morning, declaring that he would rather face the entire British army than deal with the Bell Witch again.
I think that dude, I don't know. I can see so many different parts of the story going in different directions, but like the self-proclaimed witch wrestler, so like he basically showed up and he tried to best the witch, but then he gets like thrown around. I don't know. That sounds to me like this dude, like, because the thing that he proclaimed after he got his ass kicked, you would think that if he was making shit up and being like, "Oh yeah," like, I don't, in his mind, he's like, "There's no such thing as a fucking witch. I'm just gonna go pretend to subdue this witch, and then I'll get paid, and then la di da, like I'll go down in history as helping Andrew Jackson. But what he actually proclaimed was like he got thrown around, beat the shit, and then he got thrown out. And you would think that if he was faking, he would just run his ass away. He wouldn't even bother proclaiming anything. But then you said something along the lines of like, "Oh, I've been bested by that witch. Like, I'll try harder next time." And like he tried to save some face as a witch tamer. So to me, that's like, I think that guy probably faked it. Like he probably threw himself around in like a wild way to make it seem like he was actually being attacked. But like I don't know too much about the story, so I can't really say for sure if that's what happened. But that's just the first thing that I think of that my mind goes to and from hearing that part of the story. But then the Andrew Jackson thing, like I guess there is some more credibility. There's a lot of credibility there, some would argue, because it's freaking Andrew Jackson. He was, what was, you said he was a major or whatever, like he was high ranking, and he ended up becoming president one day. So he must have had some kind of wherewithal to know that he was actually putting himself out there exploring this supposed witch. He even claimed that he had experiences with this witch. So that's pretty significant. I wonder how many presidents in history ever like openly proclaimed to have paranormal experiences. I know we talked about Winston Churchill a bunch of times over the last, whole recording of the podcast. We touched on like him seeing Lincoln's ghost during World War II. And we also touched on, I think it was Reagan who had like a story about UFOs or something like that. And anyway, I know that there are like there are presidents in American history who have claimed to have had direct experiences with poltergeists, or like politicians in general. So I think it is interesting that Jackson did have this story, and he recounted such detail about it. He even went as far as to hire someone to help them out to figure out what was going on. So, yeah, I don't know I can't make heads or tails of that part of the story. That I guess that gives some credibility to it, but I don't know. What's your thought on the whole Andrew Jackson thing?
I think it gives some credibility to it. I think it's kind of funny. Whether it happened or not, it's still kind of funny to me that like he brought like a witch tamer and the dude got his ass beat. That's something you would see in like one of the scary movies, like literally scary
Yeah,
movie. Yeah.
the dumb scary. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the dude is like, I will cast you out and he gets his ass beat. But the one final thing I wanted to talk about, which is the legend of the Bell Witch's Cave. So apparently, when the Bell Witch leaves, the legend goes that it left to this cave, which was close to the Bell family's property. And there's a few legends that are associated with the cave. So the first one is from the early 1900s. Apparently, a group of children explored the cave. One of the boys reportedly took a rock from the cave despite the warnings to not disturb anything. As they were leaving, the boy's candle went out unexpectedly. He became lost in the dark. The other children eventually found him, but he claimed that a woman had blown out his candle and warned him to return the rock. Terrified, the boy replaced the rock and the group quickly left. It was Pele.
Not the soccer player.
Not the soccer player. Another thing that happens to visitors that go to the cave, which you can visit the cave, I think they do tours of it. They report personal belongings going missing, such as keys, cameras, and other small items, and only to have them reappear in strange locations. These incidents are attributed to the mischievous spirit of the Bell Witch. And also, there are reports of ghostly figures or shadows moving within the cave, particularly in the deeper, darker sections. Some people claim to have seen a woman in period clothing, thought to be the spirit of Kate Batts, the woman who is often associated with the Bell Witch. But the Bell Witch's cave remains a place of mystery and intrigue, continuing to draw those who are curious about the legend and want to experience the paranormal for themselves. What do you make of this entire Bell Witch story?
I know people listening to this who know about the Bell Witch are probably like, if they're still listening, tearing their hair out because we didn't talk about Kate Batts in detail. And that's like such a critical, it's not critical, but it's a big chunk of the story that explains the theories behind what was going on. And just to throw it real quick out there, as I know we could talk more in depth about it, but I'll just give it a kind of cursory brush over. So Kate Batts, one of the explanations for the Bell Witch phenomena was that Kate Batts was once a neighbor of the Bell family. For I wish I knew why. I'm sure there's in some history book somewhere I can dive down deep and find it, but she was supposedly slighted by John Bell Sr. in a land dispute. Which to me, that kind of like I think of land dispute in the South. You think of what's that? What are those families called? The two families, the feuding
Hatfield and
families.
McCoys.
Yeah, the Hatfield and McCoys. I think of that, but I guess there were a lot of land disputes over the years, especially back in the day whenever we didn't have like totally legally legit ways to document and cordon off and mark land and stuff like that. So, but supposedly what happened with Kate was she, basically proclaimed that she was going to take revenge on the family because they screwed her over for this land thing. And she, I believe she ended up dying at, for whatever cause. So maybe she was around the same age and she just died of some issues or something
She
like that.
she
But
died in 1842.
okay, so she was still alive when all this was going on. So I guess the theory then was that she conjured this spirit or this poltergeist to attack the family. I wonder what interaction she had. Like, I wonder if she came out after the fact, like after all this as a potential explanation, or if she was an active suspect during the whole story. Maybe we can get somebody on. Maybe we'll try to get like Lisa on or somebody who can talk in very, very deep detail about this story. We can do like maybe a part two of the very specific examples. But I just wanted to throw that Kate Batts curse out there. There's other there's other theories about what's going on, like the curse, maybe the land was cursed, the typical quintessential Native American burial ground problem, because there have been some artifacts that might have been found and led to a haunting. And there's also the scientific explanation for like mass hysteria, psychological, and even like as we talked about, possible hoax and cover up. But just to touch on, I have to bring it up because it's kind of boring, but it's also, part of this potential answer to the story. So it sounds like in the 19th century, there was a Scottish anatomist who came up. His name was Sir Charles Bell, which is weird, right? Dude's last name was Bell. He actually discovered a neurological disorder that sounded a lot like the symptoms that John Bell Sr. actually was afflicted with at the time when he was alive, like up to his death. So, I mean, that doesn't explain for the people recounting all these interactions with the poltergeist and like the disembodied voices, but it could very well explain like him hitting himself and having all these other symptoms that he was John Bell Sr. was going through. But that's not necessarily an explanation away from the Bell Witch. That kind of just be like, well, maybe the Bell Witch just had an easier time targeting the family because Bell Sr. had this neurological disorder. But to wrap it up, the final word that I'll give out there is the final thing that the Bell Witch is said to have said at John Bell Sr.'s funeral. And again, people claim this was a disembodied voice. No one knew where this voice was coming from. There's no explanation or detail about what it sounded like. But apparently, this disembodied voice at the funeral said, "I fixed him. I fixed him. I did it. He will not get up." And to me, that's like if that's verbatim to what the poltergeist said, it's very strange that the poltergeist would choose the words "I fixed him, I fixed him, I did it." Well, fixed him from what? Maybe the poltergeist was trying to solve some greater curse or like fix things. Maybe it was a time traveler trying to fix the rift because there was some kind of like, if John Bell Sr. like lived, then America would fall apart thing. I don't know. My mind runs wild with that statement. I don't know. What do you make of that last statement that the poltergeist made at the funeral?
I think the spirit was kind of being facetious, being an asshole, if I
Yeah, I
had
think so
if I had
too.
to
Yeah.
pick. But the whole situation itself, like with the abuse of the little girl and well, she wasn't a little girl because she was engaged. But that whole situation, I don't know, dude. Poltergeist activity, supernatural, maybe Kate Batts had a hand in it because she was accused of being a witch because her husband was like paralyzed and she had to become the breadwinner. And apparently, she's had multiple incidents in which they turned violent with John Bell Sr. On one hand, I want to say that maybe there was some poltergeist activity. Maybe it was something demonic, afflicting the family. But on the other hand, was there some form of abuse going on that was covered up and blamed on a supernatural entity. Because if you think about it, he's like the head of the family. And you're talking about the early 19th century, the early 1800s, where, physical abuse was not uncommon. Maybe, his daughter was engaged to this guy and he didn't like it. And he would like beat the ever living shit out of her to get her to, break off the engagement. And they're blaming it on the Bell Witch or something of that sort. And you have everybody in this big ass cover up. And then maybe one day, like, you have John Bell Sr. like injuring himself because he's probably in a manic psychological state in which, okay, I beat the crap out of my daughter over this guy that I don't like. And then he starts abusing himself as some form of self punishment to atone for what he did. And then they find the vial. Maybe the wife poisoned him. That's why the son like gives it to the cat, because he's like, I'm not gonna fucking drink this. Like, what if it's poison? My mind was going a million miles an hour because I've seen like paranormal investigative shows and talk to other people that have been paranormal investigators. And the first thing they will ask you is, do you have any like teenagers in the home? And I'm assuming like his daughters would have been of that teenage age where there's a lot of emotion in such a small space in which, this could have been manifested. And anyone that's listening to this, if you're familiar with the Bell Witch story or the family, we're not trying to piss anyone off. We're not saying it's true. We're just speculating because none of us were there. And I know there's the red book of the Bell Witch that's supposed to be, I think Lisa said that's kind of like the canon story. That's like the legitimate story. Part of me wants to think we have Andrew Jackson involved. You have a group of strangers involved that are soldiers, that are quote unquote witch casting out professionals that experience something. And then you have the son that says like it actually talked to it. And then you have people witnessing the attack on the daughter. So I'm split down the middle on this one, man. I don't know. It's really hard for me to decide because I feel like there's something else that, we don't know about. And if it is a spirit, it might be a spirit of somebody that John Bell Sr. might have injured in the past or led to their death, and they're finally able to get their revenge. So it could go multiple ways.
One last interesting little side note. I was trying to find this specific information, like to confirm it, but in some sources it says that John Bell Sr., his actual cause of death was the first in history to be labeled supernatural causes. I don't know if that's on. I don't even know if they had like death. Must have had death certificates back then, but I don't know if that was actually on his death certificate. I would imagine they would probably put poison on his death certificate because it was an actual physical substance that likely killed him. That's just kind of like an interesting side note. Like some sources are saying that he officially was proclaimed to have died of supernatural causes and was the first person in at least American history to be labeled as dying from supernatural causes. So probably not true, but at least kind of mildly interesting.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.